Welcome to my channel. Today we step into the chilling silence of the open ocean, where a routine flight vanished without a trace. This is the story of Flight 709, better known to investigators as the Phantom Jet over the ocean. It was supposed to be a calm, uneventful flight across the Atlantic. The skies were clear, the passengers relaxed, and the crew seasoned professionals. Yet somewhere between radar blips and cloud layers, the unthinkable happened. One moment their voices filled the cockpit. The next, silence. No mayday, no distress beacon. Just static that would haunt the airwaves for years. The aircraft, a twin-engine jetliner, lifted off from Boston just after dusk. Families returning home, business travelers on their laptops, a young couple heading to their honeymoon in Paris, all unaware that within hours, they would become part of aviation's most enduring mystery. The captain, Arthur Hayes, was a veteran pilot known for his calm under pressure. His co-pilot, Jenna Morales, was a rising star, sharp, confident, and one of the youngest first officers on transatlantic routes. Flight 709's climb was smooth, the ocean below glittering under the moonlight. But as they crossed 32,000 feet, an uneasy stillness filled the cockpit. Something wasn't right. A low vibration began beneath their feet, soft at first, like the hum of distant thunder. Then came a sound, a sharp, metallic snap that made the captain glance at his instruments. "Do you feel that?" Jenna asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed concern. The captain nodded, adjusting the throttle, scanning the gauges. Everything looked normal, no pressure loss, no warning lights. Yet the feeling in his gut told him otherwise. Air traffic control in Gander received their last routine transmission at 2:16 a.m., all systems nominal, estimating Shannon at 6:42. Those were the final words. Minutes later, the transponder blinked off radar. Inside the cabin, passengers noticed the subtle change first, a dimming of the lights, a soft groan from beneath the floor. A flight attendant, Megan, walked the aisle with a reassuring smile, though her pulse raced. She peeked into the cockpit, found both pilots quiet, focused, their eyes darting across panels. "We're just checking something minor," Captain Hayes told her gently. "It's nothing to worry about." She nodded and closed the door. But something deep inside her knew this was no ordinary check. At 2:21 a.m., the plane vanished from radar completely. Controllers called repeatedly, no response. The skies above the North Atlantic, once filled with chatter, were silent. "Flight 709, please respond." Nothing but the faint hiss of static. And then, faintly, a whisper, barely audible through the white noise. "We're not alone up here." The voice was Captain Hayes's, shaky, almost uncertain, like he was talking to himself. The transmission cut abruptly. Investigators would later confirm that no one else on that frequency responded at the time. The radar return showed a sudden drop in altitude followed by an impossible climb, like the plane had plunged, then accelerated straight upward before disappearing altogether. Hours passed. Search and rescue operations were launched. Dozens of aircraft scoured the sea below, ships combing the coordinates where the jet's signal was last detected. But there was nothing. No oil slick. No debris. Not even a single life vest. The ocean held its secrets close. Families of the passengers were told it was likely a catastrophic mid-air failure. But even among investigators, whispers spread. Radar anomalies, unexplained radio interference, strange weather data that didn't match satellite records. Weeks later, a fishing trawler hundreds of miles away reported finding a single life raft drifting aimlessly. Inside were airline seat cushions, a child's shoe, and a torn piece of fuselage marked 709. But there was no sign of life. The raft's emergency locator beacon was dead. The retrieval team noted something even stranger. The raft had been exposed to the elements for only a few hours, though the flight had vanished nearly 3 weeks earlier. How had it remained intact for so long, untouched by salt or current? In the months that followed, stories began to emerge from other pilots flying the same route. They reported strange echoes on radar, ghost returns at 32,000 feet, matching the transponder code of Flight 709. Some claimed to hear faint distress calls repeating in static, always at the same time of night. Mayday, Mayday, Engine 1 unresponsive. The messages were fragmented, looping, like echoes of the past trapped in the ionosphere. Engineers said it was impossible. Yet one by one, recordings began to surface from cockpit voice channels across different airlines, all capturing the same voice, the same words, from a flight that should no longer exist. Investigators reopened the case, re-examining every detail. The weather had been perfect, no lightning, no turbulence. The plane's maintenance logs were clean. Fuel levels normal. Nothing pointed to a mechanical cause. Then came the breakthrough, or what many called the curse. A deep-sea exploration drone searching an unrelated wreck detected a faint metallic signature at a depth of over 14,000 feet. The shape matched the missing jet. Cameras revealed a haunting sight, the fuselage almost intact, resting upright on the ocean floor. The windows were shattered, the cockpit dark. But inside, something didn't add up. Both pilot seats were empty. The oxygen masks still hung in place. Every door remained sealed. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just silence, and a single light blinking weakly on the instrument panel, as if the plane had only just landed. When the footage was released, millions watched in disbelief. The aircraft had somehow preserved itself at impossible depths. Salvage crews tried to raise it, but their cables snapped one by one, as though something resisted the pull. When the camera was sent again, the plane was gone. The coordinates showed nothing but sand and darkness. The ocean had swallowed it whole once more. To this day, no one knows what really happened to Flight 709. Some say it entered a microburst and plunged instantly. Others whisper it slipped through something far stranger, a rift, a magnetic distortion, a time echo lost between realities. What is certain is that the Atlantic still carries a faint, repeating transmission, 3 words looping endlessly through the static. Not alone anymore. If you ever find yourself flying over the same dark stretch of ocean, and your radio crackles to life in the quiet hours before dawn, listen closely. Because maybe, just maybe, the phantom jet still flies out there, searching for a signal that will never come home. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if the mystery lingered in your thoughts, consider subscribing to the channel for more chilling true and inspired air disaster stories. Stay safe and keep your seatbelt fastened, because the sky, even when it's calm, hides more than we'll ever understand. The storm that night was not supposed to exist, at least not according to the radar, but nature has a way of reminding humans that some things cannot be measured. Hours after Flight 709 disappeared from the grid, weather satellites replayed something bizarre. A circular distortion over the Atlantic, perfectly symmetrical, as if a hole had been punched through the atmosphere. The control tower in Gander replayed the last 30 seconds of cockpit recordings over and over again, hoping for any clue. What they heard wasn't a mayday, it was breathing, deep and uneven, like someone gasping under immense pressure. Then came a sound that none of them could explain, a distant metallic wail, not mechanical, not human, followed by total silence. Investigators thought it was static interference, but when they filtered the sound, a faint rhythmic tapping emerged, almost like Morse code. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Someone, somewhere, was still trying to send a signal. The captain's wife, Elaine Hayes, refused to believe her husband was gone. Every night she sat by the phone, replaying the news clips, staring at the framed picture of Arthur in his pilot uniform, smiling, confident, alive. She knew something was wrong. Her husband was meticulous. He never flew blind, never missed a check. And the strange thing was, before leaving for that flight, he had told her something that now haunted her every second. If anything ever happens up there, it won't be an accident, he'd said. It'll be something we were never supposed to find. At the time, she thought he was just tired from long hours. Now, she couldn't sleep without hearing his voice repeating those same words. The search continued. Dozens of vessels combed the North Atlantic in grid patterns, deploying sonar buoys and underwater drones. At 3:12 a.m., a Royal Navy frigate picked up a weak signal, a distress ping buried deep in the static. It came from an altitude of 33,000 feet, the same height the jet had vanished. Yet radar showed nothing there. The ping moved slowly westward, then disappeared again. When technicians enhanced the recording, they swore they heard faint background noise, the hiss of oxygen flow, and a voice whispering coordinates. But when they traced them, the location was impossible. It pointed to the middle of the Atlantic, where no wreckage had ever been found, only miles of empty water. Back in Boston, the airline's emergency response center was overwhelmed. Families filled the waiting room, faces pale, clinging to any shred of hope. A mother broke down when she heard her son's backpack had been found drifting near the Azores, clean and dry as though it had just fallen from a shelf. The press called it the Phantom Jet Mystery. Experts from Boeing, NASA, and even the military reviewed data logs. None could explain the disappearance. There was no explosion, no fuel leak, no transponder failure. The systems all went dark at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. The only anomaly appeared moments before the loss of contact. The plane's altitude indicator fluctuated wildly for exactly 7 seconds, showing a climb to 42,000 feet and then a rapid dive. But the descent rate recorded was physically impossible, faster than any aircraft could withstand. The data simply stopped mid-transmission, cut off in the middle of a sentence. Meanwhile, the crew at the Oceanic Monitoring Station off Newfoundland began noticing something else: strange echoes on their long-range sonar. Every few nights, around 2 a.m., a faint signal would appear for a few seconds and vanish again. It was identical to the emergency frequency of Flight 709. Technicians marked the times. The signal came at the exact same minute every night, as if repeating in a loop. When one of them played the signal through an audio amplifier, he went pale. Through the hiss, he heard a human voice, distorted but clear enough to send shivers down his spine. "We can see the lights," the voice said. "But they're not ours." Then static. The technician unplugged the speaker, trembling. That recording was never released to the public, but those who heard it said the voice sounded exactly like Captain Hayes. Months turned into years, and Flight 709 became aviation's most haunting legend. Yet 10 years later, on a calm summer night, a cargo pilot flying from Iceland to New York picked up a faint radar return behind him. The code displayed on his console was transponder ID 709. He thought it was a glitch until he looked out his window and saw it, a faint silhouette, a passenger jet flying parallel to his route, dark, silent, and unlit. He tried radio contact, but there was no reply. He reported it to ATC, who confirmed there was no other aircraft within 100 miles. The shadow followed for several minutes before vanishing completely. When the pilot landed, shaken, investigators checked his radar log. The signal had indeed existed for 72 seconds. The call sign matched the missing jet perfectly. The system was verified. There was no malfunction. Investigators reopened the case under quiet pressure. The wreck that had once been seen on the ocean floor had vanished entirely. Some believed undersea currents had shifted it, others whispered it was never there at all, an illusion caused by magnetic interference. But deep-sea divers later reported seeing something far more disturbing near the supposed crash zone: the shape of a fuselage embedded in coral, glowing faintly under their floodlights, then fading as they approached. The currents turned violent, forcing them to abort. Their last camera frame showed the nose of a jet, with the registration number half visible, N1709A. When they returned a month later, it was gone. The sonar readings were blank. In the aftermath, rumors swirled that the plane had encountered an atmospheric vortex, a rare phenomenon where gravity, magnetism, and air pressure combine to distort reality itself. Some called it the Atlantic window. A retired air marshal went public claiming that before the disappearance, Flight 709 had been part of a classified test involving long-range communication relays between satellites. He said the flight was routed directly through an electromagnetic corridor known for strange anomalies. The government denied it, of course, labeling it conspiracy theory. But what couldn't be denied was the evidence, the endless recordings, the repeating pings, the whispers in the static. And then came the letter. It arrived at the home of Elaine Hayes exactly 12 years to the day after the crash. No return address, postmarked from Reykjavik. Inside was a single sheet of aged, weathered paper with a handwritten message in her husband's handwriting. "We are alive, but not where you think. Don't let them close it." The ink was smeared with saltwater stains, but the pen pressure and style were undeniably his. Forensic experts confirmed it matched Captain Hayes's writing. The note became the most controversial piece of evidence in aviation history. Was it a cruel hoax, or a message from somewhere no one could reach? Elaine never spoke to the media again. She moved to a cabin by the sea, where she would often sit by the shore at night, listening to her old radio scanner, waiting for his voice. To this day, pilots crossing the North Atlantic report strange readings when flying over that same corridor, unexplained static, compass spins, flickering navigation lights, and sometimes, a voice whispering through the headset, barely audible over the roar of the engines. "We can see the lights," it says, echoing through time and space. Whether it's a remnant of a lost signal or something else entirely, no one can say. But one thing remains certain: the Phantom jet still haunts the skies above the ocean, trapped between worlds, forever searching for a home it will never find. The investigation into Flight 709 had long gone cold, but one man refused to let it die: Commander Daniel Mercer, a retired Navy aviator turned aviation safety analyst. He had flown hundreds of missions across the Atlantic and had seen the unpredictability of those waters firsthand. When the official report closed with "probable catastrophic systems failure," he called it the easiest lie ever written. 4 years, Mercer kept collecting fragments, unclassified data, secret radar tapes, sonar logs, and eyewitness accounts. Most of it looked like noise, until one day, buried in a 2009 weather telemetry file, he found something strange: a second radar contact flying in formation with Flight 709 for almost 12 minutes before the disappearance. The contact was unregistered, no transponder, no flight plan. And yet it matched the jet's altitude exactly. Mercer stared at the coordinates for hours. If this was real, then Flight 709 wasn't alone before it vanished. He tracked down the last surviving member of the North Atlantic ATC night shift from that night, an aging controller named George Whitaker. George's voice trembled as he spoke. "I still hear it sometimes," he said. "That last transmission." He leaned in closer, his eyes haunted. "When the radar flickered, I saw another blip appear behind them, just for a few seconds. It was large, bigger than any civilian plane. Then both vanished at once." George had filed a report, but his supervisor told him to forget it, claiming it was a sensor echo. "I believed that until I started getting calls," George said. "Pilots saying they'd seen lights, low over the water, moving in ways planes don't move." Mercer recorded every word. Something had followed Flight 709 into the dark, something that never appeared on official logs. He took the data to the National Transportation Safety Board. They dismissed it, claiming the file was corrupted. But Mercer wasn't convinced. He hired his own research vessel and set out toward the coordinates where the plane's last transmission originated. For 2 weeks, the ocean was calm. They found nothing but endless waves and cold winds. On the 15th night, just past midnight, the sonar operator shouted. The screen showed a massive, metallic outline rising slowly from the seabed. "That's it," Mercer said, heart pounding. "That's the plane." They launched a submersible drone, its cameras cutting through the black water. For the first time in 15 years, humanity was about to lay eyes on the wreckage of Flight 709. As the drone descended, its lights illuminated something uncanny. The fuselage was upright, the wings intact, and yet it looked impossibly preserved, untouched by corrosion or sea life. The logo on the tail was bright, almost new. Inside the cockpit, the instruments were lit, flickering faintly as if power still flowed through the circuits. "That's not possible," murmured the technician. The feed began to distort, static crawling across the screen. Mercer leaned closer. The pilot's seat was empty. So was the co-pilot's. But then the camera caught something, a reflection in the windshield, faint and brief. A shadowed figure standing behind the control panel, motionless. The drone's systems froze. The lights flickered out. And then, through the speakers, came a voice, deep, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Who's there?" The sound cut, the screen went black, and the sonar reading vanished. The entire wreck was gone. Mercer's ship circled the area for 3 more days. Nothing. No metal, no debris, no sign of what they'd seen. When they returned to shore, the footage they had captured was partially corrupted, but enough remained to terrify the world. A pristine airliner at the bottom of the sea, vanishing into thin water. News networks called it the ghost plane discovery. Within days, intelligence agencies seized the original hard drives, citing national security. Mercer was warned to stay silent. But he couldn't. He had seen it. He knew there was something deeper than an air crash, something that defied the laws of physics. A week later, his assistant received a package postmarked from Lisbon. No sender name, just a small flash drive inside with a single audio file. It was the cockpit recording from Flight 709. The one never made public. The file began normally, routine chatter, system checks, cruising altitude updates. But at 2:18 a.m., it changed. Captain Hayes's voice was calm, then tense. "Jenna, what's that on the horizon?" she replied. "Looks like lights, sir, but we're still 2 hours from land." The captain's voice lowered. "Those aren't stars. They're moving." A pause. Then the sound of static and faint metallic knocking. "Boston Control, this is 709er. Do you have any traffic near our vector?" No response. "Something's out there," Jenna whispered. The knocking grew louder, rhythmic, like footsteps across the hull. Then came the voice again, not from the radio, from inside the cockpit. "You shouldn't be here." Both pilots gasped. The recording ended in silence. Mercer released the audio anonymously online. It spread like wildfire. Aviation experts tried to debunk it, claiming it was doctored. But sound engineers verified the frequencies matched authentic cockpit audio compression. The world divided. Skeptics calling it a hoax, believers calling it proof that Flight 709 had encountered something beyond human comprehension. Elaine Hayes, still living by the coast, heard the recording and wept. It was her husband's voice, calm and focused, just as she remembered. But the voice that spoke back, the one that said, "You shouldn't be here," was something she could not explain. As Mercer dug deeper, he found another anomaly. 3 commercial flights over the next decade reported identical radar interference over the same patch of ocean. Their pilots all described the same thing: flickering lights below the clouds and a massive, dark shape rising beneath them, silent and fast, before vanishing without trace. One of them, Captain Ian Larkin, went public. "It wasn't turbulence," he said during a press conference. "It was like flying over a shadow that wanted to swallow us." The aviation authority revoked his license days later, citing psychological instability. Within months, he disappeared from public record entirely. Then, late one night, Mercer received a call from a private number. The voice on the line was female, calm, familiar. "You don't know me," she said, "but I was supposed to be on that flight. My name is Clara Morales. Jenna's sister." Mercer froze. She continued, "My sister left me a voicemail before takeoff. She said she wasn't comfortable with the new navigation route, that it felt wrong. The system wasn't showing terrain. It was showing coordinates that didn't exist. She said she'd talk to the captain once they were airborne." Clara began crying softly. That was the last time I heard her voice. But last week, I got another message. Same number. Same voice. It just said, "Don't come looking." Mercer felt a chill crawl up his spine. He asked if she still had the message. She did. He analyzed it, confirming the timestamp was recent. The phone tower it pinged from wasn't in Boston or anywhere near land. It came from the middle of the Atlantic, right where Flight 709 disappeared. When Mercer tried to replay the file again, it had erased itself, leaving only static. In desperation, he contacted an old Navy friend who specialized in experimental communication systems. They replayed archived atmospheric recordings from the night of the disappearance and found low-frequency oscillations resembling heartbeat patterns buried in the ionospheric layer. The data suggested a signal of human origin, something still broadcasting faintly after all these years. "It's impossible," Mercer said, staring at the screen. "Unless the source isn't in our world anymore." His friend turned to him slowly. "Or maybe it's still flying." Reports from passing ships began to multiply. Crews swore they saw a glowing outline in the fog, the shape of an aircraft flying low, vanishing before radar could lock on. A container ship captain described hearing faint music, the same safety chime used by the airline, echoing over the waves. "It faded," he said, "but it didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like it was passing by." Every night the Atlantic seemed to whisper. The ghost of Flight 709 had become more than a legend. It had become a haunting reminder that sometimes, when a plane disappears, it doesn't crash. It crosses a threshold, one that humanity was never meant to find. And as Mercer looked out over the restless ocean, he felt it too, a deep hum beneath the water, rhythmic and alive, pulsing like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen, as if the sky itself was waiting for the next flight to take its place. The following morning, Daniel Mercer stood on the cliffs of the North Atlantic, wind whipping against his coat, the roar of waves echoing below. The ocean stretched endlessly, blue and cruel, hiding the answers he'd been chasing for nearly 15 years. The night before, his instruments had once again picked up that faint pulse, a rhythmic echo bouncing off the ionosphere, too structured to be random, too deliberate to be natural. He was certain now. Something down there was still active, something that didn't want to be found. As he stared into the horizon, a sense of dread crept through him, not from what he'd uncovered, but from the realization that he was being watched. Behind him, parked near the edge of the cliff, a black SUV sat idling, tinted windows glinting under the morning light. He didn't need to see the occupants to know what they were. Government, maybe military. He turned, locked eyes with his reflection in the glass, and whispered to himself, "They already know." That evening, Mercer boarded a small research vessel under the guise of a marine ecology expedition. He brought a compact sonar array, a hydrophone, and a single encrypted satellite uplink. His plan was simple: locate the signal, record it, and broadcast it live before anyone could shut him down again. As night fell, the ocean grew eerily still, the sky moonless. The crew whispered about the strange magnetic readings flickering on their compasses, needles twitching like nervous hearts. Mercer stood by the railing, scanning the dark horizon through binoculars. That was when he saw it, a faint glow miles away, low over the water, drifting like a floating city. It pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like breathing light. "Engine flare," one of the crew muttered. Mercer shook his head. "Engines don't hover." The glow brightened, splitting into several points. They moved in formation, gliding silently across the horizon. The sonar began to wail, screen filling with interference. Then came the sound through the hydrophone, static, broken voices, indistinct but human. Mercer leaned close, his pulse racing. "Say again," he whispered into the mic. The voice returned, fragmented and faint. "This is Flight 709. Everyone on deck froze. The voice was weak but clear, identical to Captain Hayes's tone. Mercer's hands shook as he hit record. "Captain Hayes, can you hear me?" he shouted. "Where are you transmitting from?" Silence, then more distortion. "We're still flying." A wave struck the ship, hard enough to knock several crew off balance. The lights flickered, the sonar spiked into chaos. Then, just as suddenly, everything went dead. No signal, no light, no sound but the wind. The glow on the horizon had vanished completely. Mercer felt his throat tighten. "Restart systems," he barked, but the operator shook his head. "Power's gone. All of it." The emergency backup refused to engage. They floated there in total darkness, the sea stretching infinitely in every direction. Then, from somewhere far above, they heard it, a deep, rolling hum, like turbines passing overhead. The crew scrambled to the deck, scanning the sky, but there was nothing visible, only the stars. Yet the sound grew louder, circling them, vibrating through the hull. Mercer shouted for the cameras, desperate to capture proof, but the recording equipment had frozen, screens flickering with faint green static. For nearly 2 minutes, the invisible presence moved above them, its sound resonating like a low-frequency heartbeat. Then it stopped. Absolute silence followed, so heavy that even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Moments later, the ship's power snapped back on by itself, systems rebooting, monitors flaring with light. The sonar immediately displayed something. A massive structure moving directly beneath them, hundreds of feet below, roughly the size of a commercial airliner. "There it is," Mercer whispered. "The Phantom jet." He activated the drone submersible once more and sent it plunging into the depth. The video feed came through clear this time, dark water, drifting plankton, and then the glint of metal. As the drone approached, the outline of the jet emerged, gliding slowly through the abyss, its lights faint, windows glowing as though life still stirred within. Mercer stared in disbelief. "It's moving," he whispered. The drone closed in on the fuselage, and through the cockpit glass they saw them, silhouettes, still and upright, sitting in the pilot's seat. One figure turned its head toward the camera. The transmission went white, followed by a high-pitched tone that made everyone on deck cover their ears. When the feed returned, the plane was gone. The drone's coordinates placed it in open water, no trace of metal or structure anywhere near. But the sonar still read motion, heading east at 200 knots, several miles below the surface. Mercer ordered the drone to pursue, but before it could descend further, every system on board shut down again. The sea around them glowed faintly blue, like bioluminescent algae swirling in perfect patterns, spelling shapes too deliberate to be random. That night, Mercer wrote everything down by hand, his notes cramped and feverish. He knew they would come for the data, they always did. He described the lights, the hum, the voice that claimed to be Flight 709. He wrote one line twice, pressing the pen so hard it tore the paper. "It's not a wreck, it's still alive." At dawn, he transmitted the partial footage to 3 independent news outlets. 2 hours later, his satellite uplink went dead. When the crew returned to port, Mercer was gone. His cabin door was open, his notebook missing, and only one thing remained on the desk. His wristwatch, still ticking, but frozen at 2:19 a.m., the exact time Flight 709 vanished years earlier. The footage leaked anyway. Millions watched in disbelief as the blurred image of the submerged jet appeared online. Experts claimed it was a deep-sea mirage, a trick of sonar imaging. But divers who later explored the same coordinates reported the same eerie phenomena: unexplained magnetic surges, glowing currents, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. One diver described hearing a faint announcement through his headset, like a distorted cabin intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," it said softly, "we'll be landing shortly." He tore off his helmet and surfaced in terror. In the years that followed, the story became legend. Some said Flight 709 was trapped in an electromagnetic fold, a permanent loop between air and water, between life and death. Others whispered that it had become something else entirely, a vessel caught between worlds, doomed to repeat its final journey for eternity. But every so often, when the night is still and the ocean calm, fishermen claim to see distant lights gliding just above the waves, silent and graceful, heading east into the darkness. They say if you tune a short-wave radio to the right frequency between 2 and 3 a.m., you can hear it, the faint hiss of static, followed by a voice echoing through the void. "This is Flight 709, it says. "Requesting clearance to land." And then, just before the signal fades, a final whisper follows, "We never should have looked." To this day, no one knows what became of Daniel Mercer or the crew who witnessed that night. The ocean keeps its secrets well. But if you ever find yourself flying over that stretch of the Atlantic, and your instruments flicker, and your radio hums with static, don't listen too closely. Because some voices aren't meant to be heard, and some flights were never meant to return. Weeks passed after Mercer's disappearance, and the world began to move on once again. The headlines faded, the videos were quietly removed, and the story of Flight 709 became one more myth buried under a sea of official denials. But for Elaine Hayes, the captain's wife, the silence only made the mystery louder. Every night she sat in her coastal cabin, scanning frequencies with her old radio set, chasing the faint hiss of static across the band. Sometimes, through that endless noise, she heard something, soft, distant, like breathing through metal. She never told anyone, not the reporters who still called or the neighbors who pitied her. But she wrote it all down every night in neat rows of handwriting. Signal heard. 2 yem faint voice, Arthur. One stormy night, nearly 16 years after the flight vanished, she finally heard it clearly. The rain battered the windows, thunder rolling like artillery across the ocean. She turned the dial carefully, her fingers trembling, when a sudden click of clarity broke through. "This is Flight 709 to Boston Control," came a calm, familiar voice. Her heart stopped. "Fuel low. Requesting vectors. Visibility poor." It was Arthur. Not a recording. A live transmission, filled with the strain of real breath and the faint rumble of engines behind him. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "Arthur, it's me," she whispered into the mic, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. The radio hissed, then came one more phrase, broken but unmistakable, "We're coming home." Then, silence. By dawn, reports flooded in from along the coast. Dozens of fishermen and radar operators swore they saw something. Bright lights moving low over the ocean, a large craft without identification passing silently through the fog. A coastal surveillance radar near Nova Scotia even logged a transient blip moving at 400 knots, appearing and vanishing within seconds. The coordinates matched the same path that Flight 709 would have taken on its original route. Air traffic control dismissed it as atmospheric reflection. But the pattern continued for 3 nights straight, always between 2 and 3 a.m. On the 4th night, military radar at Cape Cod caught it again, but this time, something else appeared with it. A smaller object flying close behind, mirroring its every move, as if escorting it through the clouds. By now, whispers had reached Washington. An emergency meeting was held under sealed orders, attended by aviation safety heads, Navy intelligence, and a handful of scientific advisors. The radar images were projected onto a dark screen, a massive airframe hovering over the Atlantic, emitting no transponder, yet radiating faint electromagnetic surges. "It's not a storm," one technician said quietly. "It's transmitting." The defense secretary frowned. "Transmitting what?" The technician hesitated. "Coordinates. But not ours. They don't match any geographic grid." Someone else suggested deactivating civilian radar in the region to prevent panic. Another voice asked the question everyone avoided: what if it really is 709? The room fell silent. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the thought hung heavy. If the plane had somehow returned, where had it been? That same night, a Navy reconnaissance aircraft was dispatched to investigate. It flew low over the North Atlantic, its radar sweeping through sheets of mist. At 2:17 a.m., the pilot reported strange readings, anomalous echoes appearing and vanishing faster than his instruments could process. Then, over the open channel, came a trembling voice from his co-pilot. "Sir, there's something off our nose." The captain looked up, and there it was. A jetliner, pristine, white and silent, gliding parallel beside them. Its windows glowed dim blue, its engines spinning without sound. The markings on the fuselage were unmistakable: Atlantic Skyways 709. The pilot's hands shook as he reached for the radio. "Command, we have visual contact with the missing aircraft." But before he could finish, the jet ahead flickered, its form shimmering like heat haze. The instruments spun wildly. "She's phasing," the co-pilot yelled. And then, in a flash of light, the aircraft vanished, leaving behind a turbulence strong enough to flip the Navy jet sideways. Back on the ground, the flight crew was shaken, their camera footage half corrupted by static bursts. The few surviving frames showed something impossible: a glimpse of the cockpit through the reflection of the reconnaissance plane's window. Two figures sat inside, unmoving. One wore a pilot's cap. The other, someone no one could identify, seemed to be staring directly at the lens. Investigators slowed the footage frame by frame, enhancing the image until the face came into view. It wasn't human. The features were stretched, translucent, like glass under pressure. And yet, it smiled. The analysts who viewed the footage refused to speak of it again. The official report was sealed under the classification anomalous atmospheric reflection. But the events didn't stop there. Commercial flights traveling through the same corridor began reporting unexplained navigation errors, GPS systems freezing, altimeters resetting mid-air, and ghost transmissions on emergency frequencies. Pilots described hearing phantom voices during cruise, calm, procedural, always the same words. "Boston Control, this is Flight 709. When they responded, the voice went silent. Then, for a few seconds afterward, every light inside the cockpit would dim, as if the power had been shared by something unseen. Aviation forums dubbed it the Atlantic Echo. One evening, a private pilot named Mark Donovan was flying his twin-engine prop from New York to Dublin when he encountered a heavy bank of fog halfway across. His instruments began to fail one by one, needles spinning uselessly. Then, through the haze, he saw lights, a plane approaching from ahead. He squinted, his heart pounding. The craft was enormous, far larger than anything should have been at that altitude. It passed overhead, silent, close enough for him to see its undercarriage, and printed across the belly in faded lettering, AS 709. His radio erupted with static, followed by a man's calm voice. "Hold course 242. Maintain altitude 33,000. It was the exact voice of Captain Arthur Hayes. Shaking, Mark followed the instruction, and moments later the turbulence stopped, the instruments came back to life, and the sky cleared. He turned to look behind him, but the massive jet was gone. When Mark landed in Dublin, investigators inspected his aircraft. The maintenance crew found something impossible. Traces of oceanic salt crusted across the windshield, even though he had flown thousands of feet above the sea. On the underside of the fuselage were 3 narrow streaks of white paint, chemical analysis revealing it to be decades old, and an exact match for the paint used by Atlantic Skyways in 2003. The authorities confiscated the evidence within hours, warning Mark to keep quiet, for his own safety. But before they left, he whispered to a reporter, "He saved me. Whoever he is, he's still out there." Elaine heard his story on the radio weeks later. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she packed a small bag, drove to the harbor, and chartered a fishing vessel to take her out to sea. She didn't say why, only that she wanted to see the stars one last time. The captain of the boat later told investigators that just after 2 a.m., while the rest of the crew slept, Elaine stood alone on deck, staring into the mist. Then she smiled faintly, whispered something he couldn't quite hear, and vanished. Her coat was found neatly folded near the railing, her radio beside it, still tuned to the same frequency she'd listened to for years. When they replayed the recording later, the tape captured a single transmission at 2:19 a.m., a man's voice, calm and clear. "Elaine," it said softly. "We've been waiting." From that night onward, sightings of the ghost aircraft dwindled. The signal stopped transmitting. Some say the ocean finally let go of what it had taken. Others believe the plane and its souls simply found their way home. But sailors still tell stories of the silent light that sometimes drifts across the waves when the sky is clear, gliding east, fading slowly into the horizon. They say if you listen carefully to the wind, you can still hear a captain's voice cutting through the static. This is Flight 709. All souls accounted for. Landing complete. And as the sea swallows the sound, leaving only the rhythm of waves, the world above sleeps, unaware that somewhere in the dark, over the endless Atlantic, the phantom jet still hums quietly, its engines carrying whispers of the past into eternity. The legend of Flight 709 should have ended there, with the final whispers lost to the wind and the last signal fading into static, but some stories are too restless to die. Years later, the ocean itself began giving up fragments that defied every law of time. A cargo ship crossing the mid-Atlantic reported striking an object just beneath the surface. When divers investigated, they found twisted aluminum panels marked with serial numbers that had been deregistered 15 years before, the exact parts once belonging to Flight 709. The metal looked freshly torn, no corrosion, no algae, as if it had been submerged only hours, not years. The shipping company tried to hide it, but the photos leaked online within days. The world was reminded of what it had tried so hard to forget. Conspiracy channels erupted with theories. Some swore Flight 709 had been pulled into a wormhole, trapped in a parallel dimension looping endlessly between air and sea. Others said it was a covert experiment gone wrong, a test flight meant to cross through electromagnetic corridors designed to bend radio signals around the globe. But beneath all the noise, one quiet, unassuming man kept searching for the truth: Commander Mercer's protégé, a young data analyst named Ryan Locke. He had once assisted Mercer in decoding the radio anomalies, and when Mercer vanished, Ryan inherited everything: the encrypted drives, the damaged recordings, and a single note in Mercer's handwriting: "It's still flying." Ryan spent years chasing echoes through data archives, replaying lost frequencies from deep-sea buoys and military satellite. Then one winter evening, he heard it again, the voice. A faint, trembling transmission on an unused maritime band. "This is Flight 709. Requesting descent clearance. Cabin lights restored." The signal was so clear it froze him in place. He replayed it, confirmed the audio signature. It matched Captain Arthur Hayes's voice exactly, down to the tonal frequency. But the strangest part wasn't the voice. It was the background. Through the static, Ryan could hear faint music, a soft piano melody playing over the intercom, the same in-flight tune used by Atlantic Skyways before their bankruptcy. He immediately alerted a friend at NOAA to triangulate the source. The location pointed to the same cursed corridor above the mid-Atlantic trench. Within hours, Ryan chartered a reconnaissance drone vessel and set out. The seas were calm but unnaturally so, the air heavy, electric, as if the sky itself waited. As night fell, lightning began to flicker soundlessly across the horizon, not flashing downward but horizontally, threading through the clouds like veins of white fire. Then came the sound, the low, rolling hum that Mercer had described before he vanished. Ryan turned on his hydrophone. The frequency spiked instantly, forming a perfect repeating pattern. Coded message, he realized. He cross-referenced it with old Morse sequences. It spelled a single word: home. The ship's radar began to flicker, showing a massive object descending slowly through the storm. Ryan rushed to the deck as the crew pointed upward in awe. Above them hung a glowing silhouette, silent and majestic, its navigation lights pulsing weakly through the clouds. "It's her," Ryan whispered, voice trembling. The shape grew clearer, a jetliner, white and ghostly, drifting through the mist like a mirage. The engines rotated, but there was no roar, only that low hum that seemed to vibrate through the bones. As it descended lower, the waves beneath it flattened, pulled outward by invisible pressure. The crew screamed for Ryan to move, but he stood frozen, watching as the phantom jet hovered no more than 200 feet above the surface. Through the cockpit windows, faint light flickered. 2 figures were visible. The captain's seat was occupied. The co-pilot's seat too. They looked human, but their movements were slow, dreamlike, as if caught between worlds. Then, a third shape appeared in the aisle behind them, a woman, standing upright, her face turned toward the sea. Her hand pressed against the glass. Ryan stepped closer, heart pounding. The figure was clear now, Elaine Hayes. Her eyes were open, calm, and filled with something he could only describe as peace. The hydrophone crackled to life, and her voice came through. "It's all right," she whispered softly. "He found me." The air trembled as the jet's lights brightened to a blinding white. Every compass on the ship spun wildly, alarms screaming. Ryan shouted for the crew to record everything, but all cameras had gone dark. The glow intensified until the entire horizon looked like daylight. Then, in an instant, it was gone. The sea fell silent again, the air clear, the sky untouched. When Ryan regained his senses, his watch had stopped at 2:19 a.m., the same curse time stamped on every anomaly in the case. His instruments rebooted automatically, displaying one final radar signature moving east, climbing steadily into the upper atmosphere. He tracked it until it vanished off the grid entirely. Days later, when he replayed the data, the flight number had appeared in the transponder code, 709. He tried to alert authorities, but no one would listen. His report was classified before it could reach the public. A month later, he vanished too. His ship was found drifting near the Azores, engines still running, instruments frozen mid-recording. In the cabin, investigators discovered a voice recorder that had somehow survived the saltwater. When played, it contained 5 minutes of audio, waves lapping, distant thunder, and then, faintly, a radio transmission. "Boston Control," a calm male voice said, "This is Flight 709. Final approach initiated. All souls accounted for." Then came the sound of a door opening, followed by a woman's laughter, soft, familiar, and fading into static. The recording was archived, labeled a hoax, and buried under government storage. But those who heard it said the voice at the end was Elaine's. They also said that for a split second before the tape ended, another voice whispered over hers, deeper, slower, but still human, "We made it home." Years have passed, and Flight 709 remains one of aviation's greatest mysteries. Every investigation ends the same way: no wreckage, no bodies, no definitive proof. Yet every few years, someone new claims to have heard it. Pilots crossing the Atlantic, sailors adrift under the stars, radio hobbyists scanning forgotten frequencies. Always the same words, spoken in the same calm tone. "This is Flight 709. Requesting descent." Some believe the plane was caught in a temporal echo, trapped between time and tide, repeating its final moments forever. Others say it found its way into another realm, a place where time stands still, and those lost to the sky finally find peace. Whatever the truth may be, the ocean keeps it well. Its depths are silent now, but on certain nights, when the wind blows just right, you can still hear it, a low hum, the echo of turbines in the distance, fading into the mist. And if you're ever flying over that same dark stretch of sea, and your radio crackles with an old familiar voice asking for clearance, remember this story. Because some journeys never end, and some pilots never stop flying home. Thank you for listening to this story. If the mystery of Flight 709 sent a chill down your spine, or made you think twice the next time you look at the open sky, make sure to subscribe for more stories that uncover the haunting truths hidden in the clouds. Until next time, keep your seatbelt fastened, your radio tuned, and your eyes on the horizon, because the sky never forgets.